Right, welcome to this week's edition of the Old Paratrooper podcast. And today's guest, I am joined with one of Britain's leading alpine and high altitude climbers, Mr. Kenton Cool. How you doing, Kenton? All right?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, really good. It's not quite clear blue skies. I've been for my morning run. I've been doing a few bits of admin on the laptop in the office. So yeah, today is a good day. Yeah, it's Monday. I mean, it's the start of the week. What's not to like?
Well, that's true. And you've been out and you've kind of done the run, which is, as I always say, is great for getting your head in the right space, isn't it?
No, absolutely. It's almost every single day I will run. I don't run with headphones. I don't run with music. I just me and the dog. Very, very rarely run with anybody else, and it's me time. I get my head together before sitting down in the office. It's a bit of exercise, a bit of space, clear the clutter and the noise. Yeah, I mean, for that whole mental health thing, as well as physical fitness, it's fabulous. Absolutely fabulous.
No, absolutely. I train regular 5 times a week if I can. I don't run so much now. I'm a bit big for running and I'm injury prone, but I try and get out and do some outdoor stuff because it's great for the mental health. What I like to do with all the podcasts, Kenton, is I like to start at the beginning, get a bit of a background about yourself, where you grew up, and kind of what led you down the kind of path you took in life, into the climbing and everything else. So, yeah, over to you. Where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Slough. And I don't know how big your audience is. If there's anybody overseas, Slough, I suppose you call it a suburb of London now, don't you? It's right next to Windsor. Windsor's really posh. Obviously, the King's got a big castle there, but Slough is not so posh. Possibly most famous for a poem, "Come friendly bombs, come rain on Slough." So John Betjeman. Not much going for Slough. It's pretty flat. It's got a Grade 1 listed bus station, a kind of brutal concrete structure. A Mars bar factory. So maybe that's got something to do with my adventurous streak.
But it is famed for the office as well,
It's famed for the office. Which I think does go across the pond as well to America, the office. But yeah, there's fame for the office, which I think sums it up pretty well. I'm being a bit harsh on Slough. I had a fantastic upbringing, and I grew up on the corner of a farm field. So although Slough is very built up, I was really lucky. We had a tiny little wooden bungalow. In a field, for want of a better word, just outside Slough, inside the M25. So I suppose technically we were living in London, but being on a farm gave me the access to the outdoors, and I would get thrown out. Certainly at the weekends, I'd be thrown out early Saturday morning, and I would come back covered in mud, brambles, cuts and bruises, having fallen out of trees, having made camps, and fallen in the river. So very, very happy childhood growing up with access to the outside. I mean, it's the outside again, isn't it? We've already mentioned it once. Can't beat the good old outside for a bit of rounded adventure, I think. I mean, it's certainly where I got to know what I was capable of, maybe, and just out with friends. Local friends that I was growing up with all the time, as I say, building camps, falling out of trees, and getting up to mischief. It was good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're very, very similar in age. I think you're a little bit older than myself. We actually share the same birthday.
Steady, Chris. Steady. How old are you?
I'm 45, and I don't want to look older, but
you're not a little bit younger. You're quite a bit younger. I'm 51.
Well, you look well for it. You look well. We share the same birthday of the 30th of July, which I found out when I was doing a bit of research.
Nice.
So, yeah, so we're both Leos, strong star sign, if you believe in all that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, the outdoors thing, again, similar sort of generations. Outdoors for me, climbing trees, falling off bikes, playing army, that sort of thing. And I think it was great. And I'm glad I grew up when I did. I'm glad I grew up without the social media that is out there now, because we see it. I talk about it quite a lot. Kids don't get outside perhaps as much as they should now. They're glued to their social media. And I think it's great, as we touched on again, for your mental health, even for a kid, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But I mean, I think we've got to be a little bit careful, because I'm sure your parents, my parents, probably used to lament by the fact that we would be watching Swap Shop or Tiz Was or whatever it was on a Saturday morning on TV. And they were probably thinking, why isn't Chris or why isn't Kenton getting out and playing or getting on his bike? So, I mean, I totally hear you. I mean, I've got 2 young children. Certainly my son is, big into, but if he's given the opportunity, be big into gaming, and he sort of connects with his mates on Fortnite, I think it's called, and they play games. So I think every generation has its challenges, shall we say, but I think from a broad level looking at it, I would agree with you. I think the sort of attention span of the youth of today, perhaps, I don't know, perhaps we're going to get gunned down for saying this, but they do like, the phone, the access to social media, their access to gaming, their access to what I feel is a somewhat fraudulent connection, somewhat transparent connection through social media or whatever platforms they're using, rather than face-to-face interaction and learning what works or what doesn't work for them, and learning resilience, I suppose you could call it, couldn't you? I mean, I remember falling off my push bike once at the bottom of the farm hill, totally covered in gravel rash. I mean, really badly smashed up, and having to limp back home pushing my bike, covered in blood, and everything else, because I mean, that's what we did. I mean, you couldn't just ring your parents and say, "I'm just falling off a bike, come and pick me up." You were very much on your own, and I think that's a really good way to learn, because life is hard, and life doesn't necessarily have hacks and quick route to success. You got to learn the hard way, and if that means falling out of a tree, or catching your ass on a barbed wire fence as you get chased off the farmland by the farmer, or whatever it is, that's how we learn. That's how we develop, and I think that's a really important trait, which I think you're probably right, the current generation are potentially missing out on.
Yeah, and I do feel sorry for them a little bit, but I kind of look at it 2 ways. If we had that technology when we were younger, we would have probably been exactly the same. It's not really their fault. It's just there, and it's a bit of an addiction to be on social media. That's been said multiple times. But again, it's not really their fault, is it? But it is. I try and push my children, they're 15 and 12, to get out as much as possible and try and highlight the advantages of being in the outdoors. I live right on the edge of Sherwood Forest, literally practically in the country park. So, if I can get them out doing stuff whenever they come over, then I try to, and I think that's important. But yeah, kind of moving on from that. Obviously, you went to school. What were you like at school? Were you kind of were you into school, or were you kind of not into school? Because there's kind of 2 people. You love school.
I absolutely adored school. If you could turn back the clock and stick me back in school again, I'm all over it. I was quiet and conscientious, I think my reports kept coming back at. I wasn't the brightest spark. I was lucky enough to win a place at grammar school. So I went to the local grammar school. I wasn't the brightest spark there, but I was diligent. And I put the time in to reap the rewards. I suppose it's what I was saying earlier. I think a lot of the future generation always think there's a hack to success, whereas I was the complete opposite. I just worked hard. I loved the discipline. I loved the school atmosphere. It was an all boys school. Lots of playing football at lunchtime, which I was crap at, but lots of playing football, throwing tennis balls around, chasing one another around, getting up to mischief. But ultimately, I was a very diligent student, and sort of kept my head down, kept out of trouble, and absolutely adored school. I thought it's if anybody's listening here and they're at school and they're hating it, well, I don't want to say suck it up, but enjoy it while you can, because once you get in the big wide world, it's something very, very different. So yeah, very blessed by my school education for sure.
Happy days. It's good to hear that you kind of, because I have a lot of guests on that kind of, a military 50% probably military. And there's a running theme with military people that they tended not to do very well at school and not enjoy it. And the military was kind of one of the only option to do after school, because they weren't academically that way, or they didn't enjoy it. But someone actually gave me a really good analogy the other day about it seems like the younger generation want to be at the top of the mountain, and it's quite fitting actually talking to you, but don't want to do the climbing, and I think that's very, very true. I think they see a lot of stuff through social media and think, well, I want that, but they're not willing to probably put in or realize the graft that's involved to get there.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, because as you say, I mean, we all know that Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is that you're looking at, and I'm as guilty as the next person.
Same.
I'm scrolling away on Instagram, and you see everybody's best life, and you see millionaires, billionaires, influencers appearing to live their best life, but it doesn't happen overnight. You got to put the graft in. We keep saying there is no hack to success. So you've got to learn that. I think you've got to learn that discipline and that work ethic at some stage. And school's not for everybody. I totally get that. And you do see people come through school and they perhaps coast through school, or they're playing truant or whatever it is. And then they are super successful afterwards, because they come out of school and something ignites their curiosity. And they go down that particular path. And they can be super, super successful. But at some stage, you've got to learn that discipline. And that's really important. Because if you look at the likes of Steve Jobs or Zuckerberg or Musk or anybody like that, and if you look at their backstories to what we deem success, it doesn't come easy. Musk sleeping on his floor at his first startup, just coding 24/7. Same with Jobs, the startup in the garage. Zuckerberg, working all hours, God sends, coding to get to these positions that they're in. Life is hard. Life doesn't necessarily give you breaks as such, but when opportunity comes, you need to have the discipline to run with it and to make the best of those opportunities. And for me, that was grounded in school and the discipline that came from school. You will do this work, you will hand it in on this date, and if you don't, you're going to get 0. Simple as that.
Yeah.
So for me as an individual, that it worked really, really well.
Yeah, brilliant. I agree with you. School wasn't necessarily my forte, but I realised after I was sort of more practical, and like I say, school sometimes is not for everyone, and you kind of find your way after for some people. But no, it's good to hear that. It's good to take that take on it. But what I wanted to ask you about is you were in Scouts, and I wanted to know if when you did Scouts, was that kind of a little bit instrumental in kind of the route you took later on in life? Do you think that played a part?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I was super lucky or unlucky, depending how you look at it. My scout leader was my father. So it wasn't really an option about not joining Scouts. It was the done thing. I mean, he was a scout leader most of his life. He was a group scout leader. My mother was a cub leader. Everything we did growing up pretty much revolved around the Scout Association in some means. I mean, Dad was either attending meetings or I'm folding away all the canvas after a weekend's camp, so I'll be doing that on a Tuesday or Wednesday night so it doesn't get damp. I mean, there's so much behind the scenes, not simply the Friday night troop night or the weekend camps. It just defined our lives. It really did. So I don't know whether we can say scouting was the catalyst for what I do, or whether it was my father, because it kind of morphed into one a little bit. So home life, scouting life, Dad being a common thread between the two. I mean, I learned so much from him in terms of fieldcraft and camping and looking after yourself and cooking on open fires or whatever it is. And to be honest, I did love scouting. I absolutely adored it. The opportunity to get outside with your mates. And this is back in the day, but there were no Girl Scouts back then. That came a little bit later. It was marvelous. I mean, I was a Cub Scout, I was a Scout, I was a Venture Scout, and I did some really cool stuff with them. And to be honest, my first climbing experience was through the Scouts. I was a little bit ambivalent to it at the time, but maybe perhaps that's where the seed was sown. I don't know. It's just down the local climbing wall, and then we did a little bit of climbing in South Wales on a summer camp, and I thought this was really cool actually. So it was really instrumental in my younger formative self.
Yeah, absolutely. You've said there about climbing in Wales and stuff, and I wanted to talk to you about. Obviously, I make no secret that the podcast, one of the goals is to raise awareness for mental health. And I did read that you kind of had a climbing accident back in 1996 where you ended up fracturing both your heels. Now, I have fractured a heel myself, and it's excruciatingly painful for many, many weeks. But am I right in thinking that you was kind of told that you wouldn't be able to walk without the aid of a kind of stick due to the nature of your injury? And how did that affect you at that age, kind of mentally? Because that's a big thing to happen to you, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty rubbish, really. I fell off rock climbing, and so I finished school. I just finished university. We had planned a big expedition to Pakistan, and literally the week before, I fell off rock climbing and broke both my heel bones, my calcaneum. So if you think about your foot, that little ball that comes out the back, and I did a pretty good job of doing it. I think my left one was in 8 or 9 pieces, my right one was in 14 or 15 pieces. I spent 4.5 weeks in hospital, 3 operations, and you're right, Chris. I was told, I wouldn't run again, I wouldn't climb again. I'd probably be walking with a stick, modified shoes, and it was crushing. It was absolutely crushing. And the reason why it was crushing, it wasn't so much, the prospect of walking with a stick or not running again. It was the prospect of losing my community. And you probably, I'm speaking for you and a load of servicemen, it's probably similar to when you come out the mob and you lose that community which you are familiar with, because my community back then was climbing, and everything was climbing focused. And the realization that if I can't climb, I'm probably going to lose that community as well, because as much as the community will support, people move on, and I would start going in this direction and they're going in that direction, and that absolutely petrified me. It was really concerning. I didn't really realize it at the time. It was only subsequently that I looked back on the event and realized that realized the importance of community, and what that does in terms of support, in terms of the joy it gives you, the mental support it gives you, and thinking that was going to be taken away was a huge impetus to getting back up onto my feet and to try to prove everybody wrong. Everybody's going like, "You're buggered, mate. You're not going to climb again." And I just thought, well, there's enough examples out there. Joe Simpson, for instance, the British climber that had more accidents than you and I have had hot dinners, yet he was still climbing. And once I recovered from the operations, it was all done on the NHS. I can't thank the NHS enough. It's all done on the NHS. And I had a super young physio, Catherine, still very loosely in contact with her. And I bought her Joe Simpson's book to just to give her an idea about what the climbing community and what climbing life was like. I said, listen, I don't just want to walk again. This is what I need to do. And kind of together we made this pact that she was going to do her very best to get me up and walking as quickly as possible and as mobile as possible. And then beyond that, it was going to be down to me. There was a lot of tears on parallel bars, and she would let go of me. I'd fall over. I'd get lowered into the hydro pool, and it was just full of grandmas with hip replacements, and they wouldn't allow me to sort of get out my wheelchair, just sort of roll in. The indignity of being put on one of those like chair lift things, and I'd get lowered in, and all the grandmas were going, "Oh, here's the young man again," and I'd go up and down the bloody pool. It was relentless. But I had that goal of getting back in the community, and that was a super powerful sort of cool to get better. Well, not necessarily. I mean, I still have chronic pain. I still walk with a limp, but it hasn't really held me back, I don't think. But I learned a lot. In times of adversity, that's when we're vulnerable. And I think that's when we're more open to learning, more open to challenge, more open to deep diving into who we really are and what we stand for. You hear it time and time again from people, don't you? I mean, you don't really understand what success is until you experience failure, and lying in a hospital bed with both feet on these big metal contraptions, not being able to sort of go to the loo on your own, not being able to use a bedpan on your own. And yeah, it was humbling, and it was thought-provoking, and it was bloody hard, actually. But I'm glad I went through it. I know it sounds ridiculous. I'm glad I went through it.
Well, you said that obviously the community thing, like you touched on there, it is massively, but also not taking any away from there, your kind of mental resilience. And that's obviously kind of at a young age there, you're showing the signs of your mental resilience and your drive and determination that's obviously carried you through the stuff that you've done later on with the Everest expeditions, because that's not for the faint-hearted. You've got to have a drive and a mental resilience when you're faced with adversity, and obviously you were showing signs of that from a young age. Told you couldn't, you're not going to be able to walk with that stick, and you were like, well, watch me, I'll prove everybody wrong, and you have done as well. So your kind of mental resilience as well is like obviously a big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be, because you go through the operations, and the surgeon says, well, I mean, I had 3 different surgeons, but there was one consistency, Bob Hanley. He was a orthopedic surgeon at John Radcliffe in Oxford. And he came into my room one day. I'd already had one operation which hadn't gone particularly well. And he came into my room one day and said, and then this was really, really important to me, because at the time I was really low. My mindset was shot to pieces. And he came in, sat at the end of my bed and said, right, we're going to have you in at surgery tomorrow. I'm going to rebuild your foot so you can wear a shoe without it being specially modified. And I asked him the question, will I be able to climb again? Because the first surgeon said, no, categorically not. So I asked Bob Hanley, will I be able to climb again? And he said, it's totally up to you. I will rebuild your foot. What you do after that is down to you. And that was it really sort of hit me here. And I just thought, yeah, he's absolutely right. There's no one else who's going to potentially help you. They will support you. They will do the best they can for you. But ultimately, it's down to you to pull yourself up and get out of here and get running, climbing, whatever it is again. And they were really powerful words from Bob Hanley at a time that I really needed it. And then the classic thing is with Bob, he was such a lovely man. Well, he still is. He's retired now, but he's still alive. He then realised, because this was back in '96, MRSI, the sort of flesh-eating hospital bug thing, was going around, and I was being screened, so I was in like solitary confinement. And then he looked up and he goes, bugger, you're being screened, aren't you? I'm like, yeah. He goes, listen, you probably don't have it. Shall we just, because he said he should have scrubbed up before coming in. And he said, you probably don't have it. Shall we pretend I was never here and I'll just leave quietly? And I just thought, dude, I can work with this dude. He was fantastic. Yeah, he was really, really good. I pretty much owe him everything.
Wow. Well, yeah, like I say, to bounce back from kind of, quite a serious injury, he's just, I think that's brilliant, to be honest. Moving on from that, you got into the roped access kind of stuff, didn't you? Sort of first, was that come hand in hand with your love of climbing? Because I've done the roped access course. I did it as part of my leaving the military, because apparently telecommunications antenna rigging was the next big thing. And it was rumour control. So I went and did the course up in the Lake District, and never touched it since. So I just wanted to how you went down the roped access. And again, did you enjoy that? How did you get into that?
So, I mean, I didn't really know what to do. I was living in London. I was working in various outdoor shops, Cotswold Outdoor, Snow and Rock, and things like that. But the money was pretty crap. It didn't really give me the opportunity to get out climbing and things like that. So I decided I was going to move to Sheffield, do a roped access course. I'd done a little bit already, sort of on the side, technically illegally, but I kind of knew what I was doing, ropes and harnesses and stuff like that. Did the course like you did, and then pursued it for probably best part of 10 years. And what I loved about it is we were all freelance. So you could come dip in and out of it. The money was much better than working in a gear shop. I did a lot of nights. So, we had time and a half, and you could save the overnight money because we were always working away from Sheffield by camping and things like this. So you could save the shekels. And then what I would do, I would just work for, I don't know, make it up, 2, 3, 4 months, save up the money, and then go on an expedition somewhere. And then literally I'd be in India or wherever it is. I would phone up the various companies that used to employ me from time to time, see who had work on. And if they got work on, I would come back. And if they got no work on, I'd stay in India until work was available. And then I'd come back and start working again. So it was the flexibility more than anything else. Did I enjoy it? I did some pretty rubbish jobs, Chris. Some of it, cleaning pigeon poo off buildings. Super nasty stuff, pigeon poo. I did a lot of work in Tesco's and Safeway supermarkets at night in the roof space, grappling like big curtains of rock wool, which is this really itchy, nasty stuff. I cleaned grease off of flare stacks and all sorts of things. I worked on Millennium Dome, pulling the roof fabric. But what really made a job, it didn't matter how crap the job was. If you had a good team of boys there and girls, if you had a good team around you, it made even the worst job more than bearable. And I look back on the time doing my rope access, and I think generally I really enjoyed it. Yeah, it was hard work. It was crap. We did some really shitty hours, but a good team made it bearable. Then on the flip side, you could be doing a brilliant job, and if you got a crap team, it was purgatory. But generally, a bunch of like-minded people. Most of the people I work with were climbers or cavers predominantly. So there was a kindred spirit there. And I did all sorts of things. I even did a stint offshore Africa working on oil tankers and things like this, all to just get money together to go on expeditions. And again, I think, it was a really interesting time working with lots of different people, people that perhaps I wouldn't necessarily normally mingle with, a bunch of Mancunian steeplejacks and some hard drinking, hard fighting individuals from time to time. And there's meek little me from Slough sort of mixing with all these people. It was formative years. It was part of the journey to who I am today.
Good experiences, and like you say, working with a team. If you have good colleagues and a good team around you, it does make the work. No money in the world can make that. It's priceless, isn't it? It's a good thing to work with like-minded individuals, I suppose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm still in touch with a number of those guys today, and they're still into climbing or fell running or whatever it is. I look back on my time in Sheffield with very fond memories. It was brilliant. I was doing loads of climbing, loads of mountaineering. Arguably a bit too much drinking and socialising at the same time, but that's what happens in your 20s.
It comes hand in hand, doesn't it? In your 20s, it's inevitable. So well, you're right on the verge of the kind of peaks there as well, aren't you? In Sheffield, I'm only sort of 40 minutes away from the peaks, and there's some brilliant walks and stuff out in the peaks that I think it's a bit of not a missed gem or a forgotten gem or anything like that, but people always tend to go to the lakes or Scotland or Wales, and then the peaks is actually in its own right really, really good,
Oh, it's amazing. I think I'm right in saying it certainly was when I was living in Sheffield, because Sheffield's right on the edge. I could be in the Peak District in about 10 minutes on the bus from my house. And I'm pretty sure in saying it's the most visited national park in the world. I think.
Right, okay.
And I don't quite know how to quantify that. Because a lot of people travel from Sheffield to Manchester and vice versa, or Nottingham. And I think if you enter the park, that classes as a visit. So perhaps people commuting. But it's on the doorstep of so many sort of Leeds isn't that far away. Nottingham, as you say, Derby, Manchester, Sheffield. So and it's fantastic. You got the White Peak, the Dark Peak, the rock climbing is amazing. The walking's fantastic. Yeah, it's a bit of an unsung or perhaps uncelebrated national park that we have in the UK.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, fast forwarding on, or which I don't know your timeline as such, but 2004. So obviously, for two things I want to talk about in 2004, I have read and researched that that's when you met Ranulph Fiennes, Sir Ranulph Fiennes, who is
Yeah.
he's a legend, and an idol of mine. I've read quite a few of his books. I was fascinated by the guy. I think he's absolutely amazing. And obviously, 2004 was your first kind of ascent of Everest, if I'm right in thinking.
Yeah.
So, firstly, how did the Everest sort of trip come about, and how was that first trip of Everest? What were you kind of, obviously you were fairly experienced, I'm right in thinking by that point you'd done a
Yeah.
lot, you knew a lot about your ropes and climbing stuff, but Everest is Everest, isn't it? Was the kind of apprehension there? What was it like?
So yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Chris. I was, I was pretty experienced already. I mean, I was on the back of a very successful trip to Annapurna 3 in the Himalayas. I mean, it's 7,500 meter peak. I've been to Pakistan twice by that stage. I'd done trips to Greenland. I've been climbing a lot in Alaska. I've been all over. I've been to the Himalayas probably 5 or 6 times by that stage. And I remember it vividly. It was a telephone call from a company called Jagged Globe, and I'd done a little bit of work for them already. I climbed Amadablam and Island Peak and various other things for them. And Simon Lowe, he's ex-military actually. Simon Lowe and I'm going to space the other guy's name. Anyway, so Simon, he gave me a call one day and just said, how do you feel about going to Everest for us as a tail guide, so an assistant guide? I'm like, yeah, that sounds amazing. And then he rung back probably a couple of weeks later and says, there's been a bit of a change. The lead guide's dropped out. Would you consider going as the only guide? And it took me about a nanosecond to think that through, and just said, absolutely. Because, I mean, let's face it. And I think if there's any climber out there that denies that at some stage they've probably thought about climbing Everest or what it would be like climbing Everest, if they say they haven't, they're probably lying, to be honest. I mean, it's the biggest mountain in the world. It's the highest mountain in the world. The most famous mountain in the world. So to be given an opportunity to go there for work, it's just like, yeah, I'm all over this. There was only 2 clients. Nick Banks, Nick. Oh, I forget what the names are now. And it's the 2 clients, and I went there full of confidence. I had no doubt we were going to summit. I was mentored a little bit by a guy called Henry Todd, who I'm still firm friends with, and I'm still ringing him up for advice from time to time. I mean, he's getting on a bit now. He's in his late 70s, but he's still pretty active. And I absolutely loved it. Both clients summited. I summited. It was a learning curve for sure. It was very different to any expedition I'd done before, because this is a commercial expedition to 8,000 meters. So like huge amounts of Sherpa support. You've got a sirdar, you've got fixed ropes, using oxygen for the first time. All of this was unknown to me. I was an alpine climber. I climbed with everything on my back, no support. And so all of a sudden it's very, very different. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved working with the Sherpas, and I loved the intricacies of working on a big mountain like that and trying to thread the needle with weather, and I love the downtime playing games. Once again, it's that community, isn't it? Bringing people together. So as soon as I came back, I just said to Simon, hey, if you've got a slot next year, I'll go again. And that was a differentiator, because most people who are given the opportunity to go to Everest, they might just do it once. Even the guides, there's only a small number of us who have multiple summits on Everest. And I went back another 2 times for Jagged Globe before I kind of realized, well, maybe I could do this myself. And was it 20 years on? Yeah, I love it as much as I did then. I'm going again in 4 months' time. And I'm excited. I mean, just thinking about it now, I can feel like the hairs on the back of my neck start to tingle and prick up. You know, the thought of trekking into base camp, something I've done so many times. Yet the enjoyment and the titillation almost of it, you know, the apprehension of what's it going to be like? How's this year going to unfold? You know, what's the client going to be? I mean, I know the client really well, but you know, how's he going to find it? Excited about seeing the Sherpa team again and working with Dorji, and it's just fab. I cannot thank Simon Lowe enough for that telephone call, because that's absolutely defined my life in many ways, not just my career, but everything I have done is hung upon Everest, and it's such a cool mountain. And there's a lot of naysayers, Chris. There's not a lot of people say, oh, it's dirty, or it's traffic jams or queues, or it's not really climbing because you've got fixed ropes and support. Yeah, I accept all that to a degree. But if you're good at it and you can avoid all of that, and you can still have a really raw, organic, meaningful adventure on that peak, I think it's... Yeah, thank you, Simon Lowe, for that opportunity back in 2004. Yeah, I can never thank him enough for it.
Well, it's obvious and fairly. I think you've made it fairly clear there that you're quite passionate about about Everest. But I was going to say to you, there's a couple of things I want to ask you about it. Say, obviously, you must be passionate about it because you've done it kind of a record 18 times. That's the most amount of times for a non-Sherpa, if I'm right in thinking. And that in itself, like you say, it's most people's dreams just to do it once. So then to go back and do it 18 times over like the last sort of 20 odd years, it's just, that's mind-boggling for me. But I want to ask you a couple of things about it. You touched on there the dark side of Everest. So I'd like to talk about that to a certain extent, but also how physically demanding is it? Like your level, because I read someone, again, I've read multiple books on Everest, and some say that you've got to be super fit. Some say that you've got to have an average level of fitness. In my personal, not opinion, because I've never done it, but I'd imagine your fitness has got to be also, your fitness has got to be top drawer, but also surely there's sort of genetic effects, because some people suffer with altitude, don't they? And some people it doesn't affect. Look at Nims. We talk. Nims has obviously done Everest and that a few times, ex-SBS guy, and he seems to be fine with the altitude. I know he's a kind of Sherpa background, but yeah, how do you, them sort of things, the fitness and everything, how does that?
So fitness, I was replying to somebody that made an inquiry this morning about 8,000 meter peak climbing. You don't need to be an Olympic athlete. Okay, that's first and foremost. The fitter you are, the better it's going to be. But a good average fitness should see you pretty good on Everest. And it's a cliche, but it's all up here. If you have confidence, if you believe in yourself, and a dollop of good luck. I mean, you don't want to get ill and things like that. You want the weather to be in your favor, and you've got to make some good decisions along the way. But yeah, you don't need to be an Olympic athlete, but you do need fitness. And this is a NIMS phrase. You need fitness in your back pocket. You don't even want to be thinking about your fitness. You just need to be able to call on it when you need to call on it. And the interesting thing about NIMS is, NIMS isn't actually Sherpa. NIMS is from the lowlands, which makes his physiological achievements. And I know there's controversy around NIMS, but his physiological achievements are just off the scale. Now, I passed him a couple of years ago on Everest. I'm on the way down. He's on the way up. We pass him on the summit ridge. I'm using oxygen. He's not. And we're having a conversation like we are now. Now, most people that climb Everest without oxygen, and less than 1% of summits of Everest are being done without supplementary oxygen. I mean, it's exponentially harder. Most people will be on their hands and knees at that stage. And there's NIMS, is as if I was talking to him in Oxford Street. I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, I don't know what that man's physiological setup is, but it's something very, very special. Or maybe he's just like hardwired through, growing up in Nepal, going through selection or whatever it is. Maybe he's just hardwired to be more resilient than most of us. I don't know. But most of us take time to acclimatize. 99.9% of people will acclimatize. It's just how long that takes. And as I said, most people, 99% of people will take supplementary oxygen, the bottled gas on that we carry on our back. So that definitely helps, but it doesn't make it a given. Who was it? It was Rob Hall infamously once said that on a good day with good weather and everything else, he could get someone's grandmother to the top. Take it with a pinch of salt. That's not quite true. Everest still has about 50%, 55% success rate. I mean, it's not exactly, a walk in the park, but certainly with modern thinking, modern technology, modern knowledge, Sherpa support, it is achievable to not quite the average person, but it is achievable for most people if that's what they set their heart to do, and they do legitimate prep before they get there. They do the training, but either physically or skill set, and they go with the right mindset. And certainly the clients that I work with, the glee on their face, not just on the summit, but when we come through the icefall for the last time and they've done it, and it's a life-changing event. It really, really is. And you can bang Everest all you like. It's still the highest point on the planet. There is no other mountain quite like it, and that's what makes it so unique and so special.
Yeah, I think they sort of famously said, I can't remember who said it, but it was like, why do you want to do that? And it's like, because it's there. And it is, that's human nature again. It's the highest mountain on the planet. Of course, it's human nature. We want to go and try and get to the top of it and do all sorts of things to prove how far we can push the human body, I suppose. But yeah, the kind of dark side, now you touched on it there. I was going to ask you about kind of, because you've done it 18 times, the bodies and stuff along the route. Now, there's ultimate, like loads of documentaries about this. Is it quite common? And how common are the deaths on Everest? Are they common? Because again, I'd rather get it from the horse's mouth. I trust media about sort of very, very. I don't trust media at all, to be honest. So I'd rather get it. Yeah, exactly. So I'd rather get it from someone that's been there and done it and got several T-shirts. So yeah, the bodies, the deaths. How is that?
Yeah, I mean, you're climbing in a death zone. You're in the mountains. There's objective danger, avalanches, rockfall. The stress that the altitude, even with supplementary oxygen, puts on your body is immense. Of course, there's death. There's deaths every single year. In fact, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. I think there's 18 deaths on the mountain in one season. So that's the largest number of deaths there's ever been in just one season. And you're never going to take that away. You do end up at times stepping over bodies. Some have been there for many years. Some are relatively new. But generally, it's a comparatively safe mountain. Generally, I mean, and there are always deaths, but a cliche. I mean, probably for me, the most dangerous part of Everest is possibly driving to the airport. I don't want to be flippant about it, but you can put safety parameters in place which are definitely going to help you out. But there still is, to a certain extent, the unknown. But in many ways, that's part of the allure. I mean, if we just do things which have no modicum of risk, have no jeopardy to them, then there's arguably going to be no excitement to it when we take part in whatever it is. I mean, look at mountain biking, or even if you go out running or whatever it is, there's always a degree of jeopardy and risk to whatever we do. And my job as a guide is to try to mitigate that risk the best I can to a level that all parties are willing to accept. And then we go into the arena that is Everest. I mean, bodies these days, compared with, say, 10 years ago, are quite often brought down where possible. The use of helis these days helps assist that. I mean, helis can realistically lift casualties or unfortunately bodies out from like 6.5 to 7,000 meters. So bodies are removed, but they are still there are still bodies on Everest, and it's a very sobering experience when you pass them. And every time I do pass a body on Everest, I make a sort of silent vow to myself that that's not going to be me. And if I think it's going to be me at any stage, then I would like to think I would hit the ripcord before I got to that stage and got myself and my clients out of that situation, because no summit is worth that, obviously. So yeah, it's instead of glamorizing, I mean, the media is very good at glamorizing the dark side of Everest, but the media, I mean, it's interesting. Since COVID, Chris, I deleted all my news apps. I don't read the news. I don't digest news at all for a number of reasons. Number one is I have no direct influence over the news at all. Most of the news that we read about doesn't impact me at all. I mean, all over the news recently, and this is taking nothing away for those, all those poor people in LA. But that the natural disaster, if it is a natural disaster in LA with all the fires and things like that, it's all over the media and it's terrible. But it doesn't affect me over here. I mean, all it does it saps my mental well-being, because I'm being constantly bombarded. This person's in power, this person's corrupt, there's a natural disaster here, or there's fires here, or this economy is just bombed. I have no control over that. I have no influence over that. So why should I invest myself into that? I mean, media is such a toxic environment. And it's just the same on Everest. Instead of celebrating this person just raised 100K for Alzheimer's disease by climbing Everest. Instead of hearing that, we hear, well, this person has just died, or these queues, or it's full of rubbish, which, by the way, is not. Media is a toxic medium that should be held much more accountable for what it does. It's nasty. But I digress. I mean, Everest, yes, there are bodies there. There is some litter there, but it's a lot cleaner than you would think it is. And I think you go there and you just have to be prepared for what it is that you're going to encounter. In the same way that when you were a power, you wouldn't go running into like a hot zone without doing some due diligence and without having intelligence to know what you are likely to encounter. And it's exactly the same on Everest. You don't go in there with your eyes shut. You go in there with your eyes open. And when I see those bodies, I use it as a way to focus myself and to stay sharp in what it is that I'm doing, both on the mountain and also when I get back home.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's good what you said, Des. That's why I want to hear it from someone like yourself rather than trusting the kind of media, because that it's more truthful. And again, my opinion of the media is a little bit the same. I tend not to watch it, not because I don't care about what's going on in the world, but it's just very negative, and I'd rather surround myself with positivity. Hence why I do the podcast, try and spread positivity and talk to interesting guests like yourself to spread knowledge and information and positive stuff. So yeah, no, well, thank you very much.
I think we should perhaps caveat sort of the media. I mean, the media is not just full of crap stuff, but yeah, I mean,
It's more negative than it's positive, isn't it?
That's
more
what
negative
it seems. Than positive. And if it's anything really important, you are going to hear about it anyway.
Yeah.
And if it's going to impact you, you're going to hear about it that much quicker. There's a really interesting book by Ralph Debelli, the Swiss journalist, Why You Shouldn't Read the News. It's only a small book, but if any of the readers are curious about why I don't digest news, just pick that book up. Why You Shouldn't Read the News. It's quite insightful. It really is.
I'll have a look out for that one and see if I can pick that up. Yeah, I'll have a look at that. So I want to talk to you. There's a few more bits of questions I've got for you. I know I'm conscious of the time.
But honestly, Chris, don't worry from my side. So take as long as you like.
Awesome stuff.
Unless the audience get bored.
I doubt that very much. I'm literally here in awe of what you're kind of telling me because of my obsession not with Everest, and obviously I have followed your career over the years and stuff like that. So yeah, it's proper interest of mine. But I was going to talk to you, and I apologise. They're not in an order. They're kind of an order that I've researched them. They're not perhaps in a timely kind of order as such. But I did read about you taking some medals up to the top of Everest, which I thought was a really, really nice. Just like a 1924 Olympic medal that was awarded to the 1922 Everest expedition team. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's a little known story. We tried to get a documentary made about it, but we couldn't get it off the ground, which is a bit of a shame. So just in a nutshell, Chris, 1922, it was the first proper attempt to climb Everest. The likes of Mallory, Howard Somerville, Charles Bruce, Jeffrey Bruce, who else was there? Spacing some names, John Knoll. And they didn't get to the top, but they set, for the time, an altitude record of about 8,350 meters above sea level. So like properly high, like only 500 meters from the summit. And in 1924, it was the first Winter Olympic Games. And it was Baron Pierre de Coubertin himself, the founding father of the modern day Olympics. So when he reconstructed the Olympics into what we now know as the Olympics, he did that in 1896. And the motto was higher, faster, stronger. And when he said higher, he was actually talking about aeronautics, which was a fledgling activity back in 1896, and climbing, or alpinism. And what they used to be able to do, I presume they probably still can, is look back on the last 4 years between Olympics. And if there was something which was particularly outstanding, they could award Olympic medals. So pretty cool. I mean, the last time this happened for climbing was in 1988. And the IOC awarded Reinhold Messner, the Italian climber, the first man to climb all 14 8,000 meter peaks, and Joey Kukuczka, the Polish guy, who did the same feat just about a month after Messner. And they were both awarded silver medals at the Calgary Games in 1988. But the first time these were awarded was in Chamonix, 6th of February, 1924, and Coubertin himself handed over 13 Olympic gold medals. 11 went to the British. So it was a British expedition in 1922. 11 went to the British, 1 went to Australian, Charles Finch, and 1 went to Tenja Bora, who was a Gurkha, a Nepalese Gurkha. You can see that medal in the Gurkha Museum in Winchester, and it sits there alongside various VCs and MCs and DSOs and whatever. It's pretty amazing. And Coubertin said, when he handed them over, it was his sincere wish that at the very next opportunity, one of these medals makes its way to the summit of the mountain, i.e. Everest. But it never did. And we stumbled across this story, thought it was really, really cool. Researched it, tracked down, I think, 7 or 8 of those 11 medals, including Tenja Bora's. And we were loaned one by the Wakefield family. So it was Arthur Wakefield who was given one of these medals in 1924. We were loaned his medal, and in 2012, when the Olympics were in London, the big celebration, in 2012, we took that medal to the summit of Everest to fulfill that pledge from 1924. It was absolutely amazing. Yeah, the medal was probably about that big. 1924 gold medal. And there's a lovely story. I travelled to Toronto to go and collect this medal from Charles Wakefield, Arthur Wakefield's great nephew, I think. And we were drinking a whiskey late one night, and I didn't know Charles at all. And we're in his kind of office, and he sort of handed me the medal, and he said, "Well, take it to Everest. You got my blessing." And I said, "Oh, listen, Charles, we're going to have to bring up, how do I insure this? It's a family heirloom. It's a 1924 Olympic gold medal. I mean, I don't know what it's worth, but the provenance for it is like just off the charts." And he took a sip of his whiskey, and there's a deep breath, and he said, "Insurance. I've always thought insurance was a bit of a dirty word." And he leaned right into me and goes, "I have your word, don't I, that you're not going to lose it?"
No pressure.
I just thought absolutely fantastic. I mean, what a lovely human being to loan me that medal without any insurance. And he just looked me in the eye and just told me, don't lose it. And in the society that we live in, with all the paperwork and all the like crap that goes around, one man's word to another man is worth its weight in gold. And I just thought that was a beautiful little story from that amazing narrative of gold medals on Everest.
Yeah, it's refreshing that to hear, like you say, one man's word to another. It seems like a forgotten thing now. But how many times did you stop to check on the way up Everest that you'd still got it on you?
All the time. There's some film somewhere, and I got it out. I've got it in my mitts on the summit, and I'm walking up to the summit with it in my mitts. And of course, with mittens, you can't hold on to things properly. And I was absolutely petrified. Absolutely petrified I was going to drop it. Can you imagine? Oh my God!
I'd have been thinking about that the whole way. If you had lost it, the route back down would have been like 10 times harder, because that would have been in your mind, wouldn't it? It probably made it.
I wouldn't be able to come home. I don't know what I would have done. Thrown myself off the north side.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, I kind of stumbled upon that story myself, and I thought it was, really, really nice to mention that, because again, I think it was a really nice touch to fulfill that pledge, So
yeah, and if any, I mean, we filmed the whole thing, but we couldn't get a commission for a documentary. I still today think it would make a very strong documentary. I mean, the backstory to those medals is so strong. It really is. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And that gold medal awarded to Tenjabura, I think it was a lance corporal in the Gurkhas, is still Nepal's only gold Olympic medal.
Wow.
It's just incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, what a story. It is incredible. Well, hopefully the documentary, at some point, someone sees sense and decides to kind of to make a documentary about it. Because I, for one, and I'm sure a lot of people would love to hear that story and see the footage and stuff. Because, like I say, quite emotional and, like I say, nice to fulfil that pledge. So moving on to, obviously, I talked about Ranulph Fiennes being a proper idol of myself. I was going to ask you briefly, what's he actually like I know the podcast is about yourself, but if I've got an opportunity to someone that's spent a lot of time with Sir Ranulph Fiennes, then I'd be missing a trick not to just ask to give me your opinion of him.
Oh, I love him. In the same way that I owe a lot of my career to Simon Lowe, who first gave me my opportunity on Everest. I owe a lot to Ran. Now, I was a young mountain guide, newly qualified, and one of my very first clients is Ranulph Fiennes. And he spent about 6-7 years working with me. We used to climb about every 6 weeks. We went here, there, and everywhere. We climbed some pretty hard stuff, including the north face of the Eiger. I became the first British guide to successfully guide the north face of the Eiger. The notorious, they call it the Death Wall in Switzerland. And then I was with him 2 times on Everest, actually. He didn't summit the first time, so he went back the following year. I look back on my time with Ran with very, very fond memories. Not seen him for a little while. He's got Parkinson's now, I think. He's quite unwell. I saw him about 2 years ago in at the Kendall Mountain Festival, and I was like interviewing him and emceeing questions and answers with him on stage. And I walked into the hotel, and he was walking down the corridor as I was checking in. And I shouted to him, and I'm like, Ran! And I screamed down the corridor, and you could literally see his eyes light up. And we had a wonderful sort of 24 hours together. And I was there with my son. So my son had dinner with Ran, so Ran very kindly took us out to dinner. It's so funny, actually, because we did a talk. And Ran clearly enjoyed it, and he was suffering a little bit with Parkinson's. And he said to me, why don't we all have supper together tonight? I'm like, yeah, Ran, that'd be really, really nice. He goes, it's on me. And I looked at him and I grinned. I said, you're on expenses, aren't you? He goes, absolutely, I'm on expenses. Anything you want. And so we had supper together. So my son had supper with Ranulph Fiennes. And then in the morning, we had breakfast with Sir Chris Bonington.
Wow.
And I don't think Willoughby were ever really appreciate how lucky he was to share a table with those two legends of adventure, albeit in sort of slightly different sort of spheres. Both of them fantastic ambassadors for their sports, of adventure, but also for this country. Is amazing. Ran. Well, we had our ups and downs, but there were definitely more ups and downs. And I'm very blessed, very lucky to have spent so much time with somebody that unfortunately won't be replaced when he leaves us. There is nobody else quite like Ranulph Fiennes. And if people don't know who he is, pick up some of his books. He's written like over 20 books. He's written some fiction, or apparently fiction, or who knows whether it's fiction, things like The Featherman, but then Mind Over Matter, or Fear, or Cold. And he's a good wordsmith. They're readable books. They read like novels, most of them. So a phenomenal person, and I miss our days together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what an absolute living legend, I picked up The Featherman. It was quite hard to get that book for a period of time, and a kind of stuff there that he alludes to in there. I have heard rumblings of that, and it is supposedly fiction, but I think
Well, who
this.
knows?
Who knows? I
Who
think there's
knows? I mean,
elements of
I
truth.
hit him up on it one day. I said, "Come on, then," because if people don't know, The Featherman, just very, very briefly, brief synopsis. Ran was fighting in Oman, and I think it was a government-sanctioned thing. Anyway, it's all a bit political, and a sultan's son or somebody gets
That's right.
gets killed, and then anybody that was implicit in that killing they started to mysteriously die. And the premise is that I think it was a French hit squad or something like that had been employed to start to knock people off. And of course, Rand is all involved with it. And so I said to him, come on, is this fact or fiction? And he just looked at me and laughed and said, well, the thing with books, Kenton, or the thing with literature, is that you've got to make fiction seem like non-fiction and non-fiction seem like fiction. And he just walked away. I'm like, well, what does that mean?
That's
I
not
mean,
answer the question.
does that mean it's true, or does that mean it's not true? And who knows? Who knows? But it's a bloody good book and well worth a
Absolutely.
read.
It was made into a film, wasn't it? The film was okay, The Killer Elite with Jason Statham, and that was based on the book.
Oh, I've not seen that. I know Rand was forever like selling or trying to sell book rights or film rights or whatever it's called. Oh, I'd look that up.
It's got Jason Statham, and I believe it's got Robert De Niro in. I could be wrong. It's a long time ago since so much. Yeah, it was called The Killer Elite, but I believe it's based loosely, and there is a character in that is supposed to be Sir Ranulph Fiennes as well. So I might be missed. I'm pretty certain it's called The Killer Elite. So have a look for that. But yeah, what was he like on when you were doing the IFMGA? Because I know he kind of publicly made it people aware that he was petrified of heights. So then, of course, you go and do the north face of the IFMGA.
Yeah, I mean, I think the petrified of heights thing was perhaps hyped up a little bit for the media.
Right.
I mean, there's nobody more media savvy than Ran. He courts the media very well, always has done. There were moments. I mean, he managed to pull the cameraman off at one stage through his incompetence. He was forever dropping bits and pieces, but to his credit, I mean, by that stage he had a double heart bypass, and the north face of the IFMGA is a hard climb, and one of the hardest sort of things that we would legitimately do in the Alps without being like a really, 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 really good climber. We were on it a long time because we couldn't go fast because he couldn't raise his heart rate, so we were on it about 5 days or so. But what Rand's very good at is, he's got a diesel engine. He's just very good at keeping going. And he was really good on it. And I remember we get to one of the bivouac sites. So bivouac is where you sort of you spend a night without a tent, things like that. And we had to dig it out. And Rand was for 2 years running the army hole digging champion. So he was very, very good at digging. So you just give him a shovel and just let him get on with it. And
Watch him go.
he flattened this like bivouac spot where we could all lie down in a matter of minutes, just like shoveling like a man possessed. And he's, totally in his element because there's no technical competence to digging. He just like can bloody dig. And he will regale us with stories. Often stories that I had heard before because I spent so much time with him, but it didn't matter. They were always told with such gusto, and you give him a cup of tea and he's so happy now he's got a cup of tea and he would sit there. It's just fantastic. He was so stoic on it, and of course, through his efforts and the efforts of Marie Curie, I think on that one we raised, I don't know, between 3 and 4 million quid for Marie Curie cancer care. So everything he's done. Yes, of course, he sells a book on the back of it, or he's corporate speaking gigs that he does and his speaking tours, which are all based upon his adventures. But let's not forget how much money through his adventures that he's helped raise. I mean, it's not simply him, it's the fundraising of Marie Curie or the British Heart Foundation, who he used to align with. He's raised literally, I don't know, like millions, 15, 20 million quid over his career, which is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
Absolutely, and no one's going to begrudge him. He's still got to make a living at the end of the day, even though he's Ranulph Fiennes. He still has to make a living.
Absolutely.
So if he has to sell, sells books off the back of that. But again, what he's done is massively kind of, it's amazing raising that money and then pushing himself at these sort of ages that he did. My famous one is how he was told about the heart bypass, and he was told he wasn't allowed to raise his heart rate, and then he went and ran 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days. And I think he famously spoke to a reporter or someone, and he said, "So what did your heart rate get on your?" And he went, "Oh, I don't know. I forgot the watch." So he's just like totally like brilliant. You know what I mean? A bit of a lunatic as well, but I like that about him.
No, absolutely. I mean, a renegade. He's a bit of an outlier, and so somebody that we started this podcast talking about schools and things like that. I don't think he went to Eton. I don't think he particularly enjoyed it. I don't think he was particularly academic. But look what he's done afterwards. I mean, he found a niche. He was by all accounts very good in the army. He left the army and then pursued his career as a serial adventurer, and carved this, at the time, a unique position for himself, and it's been super successful in terms of what he's done, but also financially, and you can't begrudge him. So people may not like school, but there's still these amazing opportunities nevertheless.
No, absolutely, an absolute legend, and thank you for just sharing a bit about him. Like I say, it's I'd love to talk to him on the podcast, but like sadly, he's obviously a bit poorly at the minute, and I think I've perhaps missed that opportunity, unfortunately. But so kind of moving on, I want to talk about the kind of the Everest Triple Crown, because that. You were the first person. Are you the only person? You were certainly the first person to do it. They deemed it was something that was perhaps impossible. Was that right?
Yeah, so the Triple Crown is, so there's 3 mountains that are kind of all interlinked on Everest. You've got Everest, obviously the biggest mountain. Then next door to it, you've got Lhotse, the 4th highest mountain in the world, 8,500 odd meters, I think. And then linked to that, you have Nuptse, which is the 19th highest mountain in the world. And between them, they sort of form this amazing hidden valley, this Western Coombe it's called. And back in 2013, I had this slightly harebrained scheme. My client never turned up for Everest, so I was like left twiddling my thumbs a little bit. And I just decided that, maybe you can climb all 3 in one go, in one season. And I wasn't the first person to climb all 3 of them, but I was the first person to climb all 3 sort of in a season. I left base camp and climbed 1 and then 2 and then 3 without coming back to base camp. It really was a snatched opportunity because I was meant to be there working with a client. So, I mean, it just goes to show how, we do need to be flexible in what we do in life. And when the opportunity does come, we have to assess that opportunity and sometimes run with it. And I was blessed to climb Everest with, not Everest, Nuptse that year with Alex Triton, who is this amazing Spaniard who I bumped into for the first time in ages, just a couple of months ago out in Nepal. Very strong climber. So we kind of joined forces literally the night before, and we climbed Nuptse together, and the rope ran out near the top. It had been fixed lines being put in place by the Sherpas, but it ran out near the top. And we like looking at one another going, oh no, what do we do? And Alex being Alex said, well, why don't we just cut some of the fixed line? And we're both competent climbers or super experienced. And we kind of climbed in a more sort of alpine style way with sort of switching leads and just using the bits of equipment that we had. And getting to the top of Nuptse was pretty it was quite scary because it's it's quite sharp ridge and there's no fixed ropes and we weren't using oxygen. But that was pretty cool, and that was the starting block. And then after that, I teamed up with Dorji, my number one Sherpa, and then up and down Everest really quickly, and then up and down Nuptse literally the next day. And then on Nuptse, unfortunately, we got involved with a rescue that didn't go quite right. So having spent a long time with a Taiwanese climber, trying to keep him alive, he unfortunately passed away in my arms, which left a bit of a sour taste to what was, well, I mean, a bit sycophantic, but it was a pretty amazing achievement to have pulled off climbing these 3 peaks in succession, like bomb, bomb, bomb. I remember sort of coming back down after Lhotse feeling pretty empty, both physically, but also mentally. I hadn't really been quite so close to death before. I mean, I'd been around death. I mean, I pulled bodies off of fixed lines and things like that, but to actually have somebody die in my arms, especially somebody who we were trying to save, and at one stage it looked like we might be able to save him. He started to respond to drugs we were giving him. So it was a sort of bittersweet success in many ways. And then oddly, I said afterwards that, I was interviewed and I said, I don't think this achievement will be repeated for at least 10 years. And exactly 10 years later, my good friend Garrett Madison, who I work with quite a lot on Everest, he did the same thing. He didn't quite do them back to back to back, but he did them all in one season. It was exactly 10 years.
Wow.
It was amazing. Absolutely amazing. I was so pleased it was Garrett because he's a good dude. And he runs a really good sort of Everest outfit. He's got, I don't know, something like 12, 13 Everest summits. And, he's always...
He's chasing you.
Yeah, I know. He's a few years younger than me as well. But it's not about the numbers. It's really not about the numbers. It's just about being around good people. And he's a good dude. And it was really cool to see him do it. And there's a young guy, actually. I say young guy, he's not that young. A young English guy, Jay. He's going out to Everest this year with a view to doing the Triple Crown as well, to try to climb all 3 of those mountains. So we're in pretty constant communication, actually. I'm trying to give him a little bit of advice, best way to do it. But I wish him all the best as well. He's training like a beast at the moment. And it's one of those really interesting things, isn't it, Chris? Because on one hand, you've got Jay, who's training really hard and he's really focused on this project. And for me, it was a last minute opportunity. And I sometimes think that those snatched opportunities are the best way to do things because, you don't get stressed out by it. You don't overtrain for it. You don't get overwhelmed by how enormous the project is. It was literally last minute when my client didn't turn up. It's like, okay, I can either go home or I can go big. And maybe I can get a Nuptse permit and then climb all these mountains. So it'll be interesting to see how Jay gets on this year. I really do wish him all the best. He's a good guy. And he's thrown his heart and his soul into this project. So, watch this space. I've got my phone here, actually. I could try to pull up his Instagram and try and get him a few followers. Jay Whittin. So his Instagram is just Jay's Climbs, Jays Climbs. And he's putting a lot of effort into this, and he's raising money for charity on the back of it as well. So give him a follow.
Well, yeah, well, send me his link on Instagram when we
Yeah,
at some point, and then I'll share some of the stuff he's doing and stuff like that on my Instagram. Like I say, I've not got a huge following, but it gets
yeah,
quite a few views
we
and
could have
stuff.
a shout out. Yeah, I mean, he's doing good stuff. I just see my hair. I've not showered since my morning run. It looks like I've been dragged through a hedge backwards. You could have told me, Chris. I'm going to stay to
Well,
that.
at least you've got some. Mine went a few years ago. Look, so
Is that what you wearing the cap? I just thought you were
it is
trying to
why
be
I'm
cool.
wearing it. I tried to grow it back over Christmas, but I look like Friar Tuck, so I've succumbed now to accept that I am a bold man at
Yeah,
45.
well, mine's
It is
going.
what it is.
Look, I mean,
I didn't want to say, Kenton. I didn't want to say. I was going to say there was a bit there. It's a bit of a comb over at the front there, to be
yeah, but
honest.
it's a little bit. But I blame it on the run this morning.
Yeah, fair one, pal. Fair one. Well, look, it's probably because you've been up so many mountains and been a bit windswept. That's probably got something to do
Oh,
with
yeah,
it.
yeah. Windswept and interesting, as Billy
Yeah.
Connolly once said.
Brilliant stuff. Well, there's two more things I want to touch on. Obviously, you got married in 2008. Now, I don't want to delve into your personal life because that's fine, but how does your partner, your wife, you've got to have a supportive partner to be able to support you on what you do. Obviously, it's time away from the family. So, you know, how is that? I'm assuming she is very, very supportive of what you do, and you kind of need that, don't you?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things. I mean, you would have to ask her to an extent, but we talk about it, and I was already. So we met 2006. So I'd already climbed Everest twice. So I was about to leave on my third expedition, and I was doing a lot more expeditions then than I am now. So it was very much part and parcel of who I was and what I do. And she's always been massively supportive. I mean, she is the anchor within the family unit here. She's way more organized than me, thank God. And she's got her own career. I mean, she's in London today with clients and again tomorrow. And she's been nothing but supportive. And when there's been the low points, say after Mr. Lee, or because I have lost numerous friends in the mountains, and it never gets any easier. And she's always there as an emotional crutch. When I need it. I mean, on one hand, she's there to help celebrate the success and keep me grounded, and then on the other hand, she's there to help me through the rough periods as well. And you could argue she doesn't have to, but she does. And I think my career certainly wouldn't be what it is without her. And we live in a beautiful house in the Cotswolds and things like that, and a lot of that is down to her as well. And we've got two beautiful children, and touch wood, they're morphing into fantastic young human beings. And again, I'd love to take some credit for that, but I think again it's Jazz who's just been this amazing, I say, anchor to the family unit, because there's a degree of uncertainty in what I do. I'm away a lot. It is dangerous to an extent what I do, and she manages to ride that emotionally for herself, but also be there for the other three people in the family. She is an absolutely incredible individual, and it's always very hard to say thank you enough. I mean, I know people come together as units, and we bolster one another, but at the same time, I think she perhaps gives out a lot more than she receives from me in terms of support and emotional that emotional crutch. So yeah, phenomenal human being, she really is.
Oh, that's awesome stuff, that is, because you hear about a lot of the times where people go into relationships, they try and change the other person. You were already a well-established climber by them, and she supported that and everything else. And it's either one or two things: it's either the person stops doing what they love the most, or the relationship doesn't kind of end up working out. So it's good to see that it works, and she's very supportive. So
Hmm.
that's brilliant.
I mean, obviously, I mean, there is give and take on both sides. I mean, I was living in Chamonix in France, climbing Mecca when we first met, and I kind of chased her back to the UK. I mean, that was my choice, and as you know, Chris, there's always compromise in any relationship. Doesn't matter if it's husband, wife, or business relationships or whatever. So there is give and take. I mean, I don't climb as much as I perhaps would like to or used to. But I do have other priorities now as well. There's a family to look after and to bring up and to nurture. And I adore spending time with Jazz, obviously, and she doesn't climb, but we ski and we go for walks and we run together and things like that. So there's priorities change as you get older, and it's not
Absolutely.
20 years ago it was just like climb. That's all I did. Whereas now I like to think there's a few more strings to my bow. Perhaps I'm a slightly less obsessed and slightly more rounded human being than I was 20 years ago. But we see.
More wisdom.
Otherwise
More
sometimes.
wisdom.
More wisdom. I like that. I'll take that one, Chris.
Take that. Yeah. Well, you talked about the skiing, and that's kind of sort of some, kind of wrapping up with the last thing I wanted to talk about was the ski that you did from an 8,000 sort of an 8K peak. Now, firstly, where did you pluck that one from? Because I mean, a lot of the stuff that you've done, some would argue, is a bit bonkers anyway, to sort of the normal kind of average Joe, if you like. But deciding to like ski, down and out the 8,000 meter summit, that's not a normal kind of thing, is it?
No, and it's pretty crap, to be honest.
Right.
And the reason why it's not very good is if mountains are good to climb, they're generally not good to ski. And if they're good to ski, they're generally not good to climb. I can't really remember where it came out from. So at the time, my business partner was a very, very good skier, a dude called Guy Willett. And I can't really remember who came up with the idea. But at the time, no Brit had skied an 8,000 meter peak. So we selected Choi Oya, which I think is the 8th or the 10th. I think it's the 8th highest mountain in the world. It sits on the Chinese-Tibetan border. It's a relatively easy 8,000 meter peak to climb, if there is such a thing. And a small group of us went across there. It turned out I was the only one that ended up skiing down, which proved to be quite stressful because skiing is one of my weaknesses in my sort of arsenal of mountain skill. Not much skiing to be had in Slough, and my parents couldn't really afford to send me on ski holidays. So I didn't start skiing until my mid-20s. I can't quite remember where the idea came from. I mean, ludicrous idea, really, because as I say, it's a bit of a crap. It's a really crap ski. There's about 200 meters of enjoyable skiing on the whole thing. Skied it on my own. I ended up skiing away from the climbing route, so that was a bit stressful. And it was so rubbish that 3 years later, whenever it was, I decided to go and ski another one. And I went and skied Manaslu, which I think is the 10th highest mountain in the world. So I skied that in 2010, I think. I think Choi Oya was 2006. Yeah, I think it's 2006, the year that I met Jazz. So in the autumn.
That's what I've read, 2006.
Something like that. I can't remember. And it was such a rubbish experience that I went back to do it again.
Sucker for punishment, clearly.
Yeah, and to be honest, Chris, it wasn't much better. But it is, and it's not that much quicker coming down. Certainly when you're not as good at skiing as me. But I think I'm right in saying that I might be the only Brit that has skied 2 8,000 meter peaks. But I mean, it's not about the record. It's all about experiences and having fun. And
absolutely.
In fact, 2008, I was struggling with the whole commercial side of 8,000 meter peak climbing, and that Manaslu expedition was fabulous. It was really, really good fun. And it reignited my love for being in the big mountains. I was there with he's now my son's godfather, Andy Eggleston, who's an accountant, but we won't hold that against him. And we had good fun on that mountain. It was good. I mean, the ski was crap, but but fun was had. And that is ultimately, Chris, why we do these things. We ultimately, I think, do these things because deep down, they are meant to be fun. And both those trips were good fun.
Yeah, what you just said there at the end, I totally agree about the experiences. I'm all about that myself, and I'm a big believer in putting yourself out of your comfort zone. And, I couldn't think of anything worse than living your life not putting yourself out of your comfort zone. and it's always good to try and do stuff, and that's why we do stuff. It's human nature to kind of test, search out these kind of experiences that push us to our limits, isn't it? And I can't compare my experiences to yours with mountaineering, but I look at the pushing myself out in the Middle East doing sort of bodyguarding work, and that's well without my comfort zone when I was like 24 years of age, being IED'd and stuff like that. So we seek these thrills, and I look back at myself back then and think, God, I couldn't think of anything worse now, but you do, don't you? You kind of you thrill seek, you're looking for experiences and ultimately a bit of a story to tell. It's good to have stories and talk about your experiences, I find.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and what you were doing when you were 24, what I was doing when I was 24, I wouldn't want to repeat most of the stuff I was doing in my 20s. It would either be too scary or too uncomfortable, or because life moves on and we develop as people, and our tastes and our wants and our appetite for discomfort or being in dangerous situations change. I can see behind you, you got some medals up on the wall there, which I presume are campaign medals or something similar to that. And I bet if I said to you, right, you can go back to the Middle East or Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever you were serving, and you'd probably say, you got to be joking. But at the time, it would have been, I use the term loosely, and perhaps this is more applicable to what I was doing. It was exciting and sexy.
Absolutely,
But it doesn't mean I want to do it today. Absolutely not. Because we change and priorities change, and we get our thrills in other ways. I still love going to the mountains, but I equally love. I've just built a Tamiya remote control model with my son, and got so much joy out of building it. And we gave it its first test run yesterday up and down the driveway, and that was as much fun doing that with him as climbing the north face of the Eiger was with Ranulph Fiennes all those years ago. So things change and priorities shift, and what excites us and what we want to do changes with time as well.
Absolutely.
I think we just need to be conscious of that. Life doesn't stand still. It's a constant journey, and it's a journey that constantly changes.
No, absolutely. And I have to simplify things in my brain because that's the way my brain works. But I liken it to your tastes as you grow older. I wouldn't have dreamed of drinking whiskey in my 20s, but now I find myself quite a connoisseur. So it's, you kind of taste changes as you age in all walks of life, and, you kind of adapt to that and everything else. And occasionally you get the glimpse of maybe I fancy a can of Foster's. And you go back and you do something that you used to do, and then you think, you know what, that's why I stopped doing that. But if that makes sense. But no, look, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I find it absolutely fascinating, and I know my viewers and audience will 100%, because your stories are absolutely fascinating. I just want to touch on very, very sort of last at the end, stuff that you're up to in the sort of coming months or the immediate future, and anything you kind of wish to promote or talk about.
Yeah, I'm back and forth to the Alps quite a bit. I'm training up clients for Everest this year and next year. So the Alps are such an amazing playground to build skill and sort of confidence, and the skill sets required to go to Everest. So yeah, I've got trips to and from the Alps over the next few weeks. Back to Everest this spring. Bolivia in August time, and super excited in September. I'm back to Pakistan. I love Pakistan, and fingers crossed. It's not a big peak. It's a 6,000 meter peak called Layla Peak, and it's a properly sharp, very prominent mountain in the Hushi Valley in Pakistan. So yeah, looking forward to that. And then I think we're back to Nepal in November for a Everest Base Camp trek. So if any of your listeners actually want to come to Everest Base Camp with me, then hit me up for that in November time. We take a small bespoke trip to base camp, and many people say to me, well, you climb Everest, you must get bored trekking to base camp. And honestly, Chris, I know you said it earlier that you like to go to base camp. It is wonderful. It's such a cool trek. I've trekked all over the world, but there's nothing quite like Everest Base Camp. So we've got a busy year ahead. We've got a mini speaking tour in Ireland in June, I think, and yeah, all sorts of things, family ski trip, and there's always a lot bubbling on. I'm so lucky to be able to say that adventure is my career, and I will never ever lose sight of how lucky I am to be able to say that.
No, absolutely brilliant. Oh, it sounds like you've got a fun-packed year coming up of excitement. So fair play. I always try and be cheeky at the end of every podcast. So obviously, if there's a discounted spot on that Everest base camp trip, or you find yourself wanting to invite someone along, you know where I am. You've got my email, so no, I'm kidding. But no, it is high on my list of priorities to do with my partner. She wants to do it as well, so I will get round to it at some point. And it'd be great if you were over there at the same time. So I'd
Bring
love
you
to.
some details, Chris.
Yeah, please do. And any information and stuff, like I say, please give me a follow on Instagram, and I'll kind of chat to you on there about this and that. But I'd love to pick
Yeah,
your brain
100%.
further. And absolutely. Well, again, been an absolute pleasure. I will chat with you in a second off air, but thank you very, very much for taking the time. And please, whatever it is and all those things you're up to this year, please stay safe.
I will, Chris. Thanks very much for having me on.
My pleasure.
Be cool.